Good morning, everyone. 14th of July, happy Bastille Day. I'll start up screen share. And there we are. And we've got the presentation. As I said, today's is about the normal. Today's agenda is very, very simple. We start off with an introduction to the normal component, followed by the characteristics. Then we'll discuss TOPDOG, the easy way of identifying the normal, like cars they like, and social skills objections, how we gain commitment with them. Then the subject of personal dissonance, who are the components that don't like the normal? And then finally finish with the normal combinations, the normal with the hustler, mover, double checker, artist, politician, and engineer. As you know, I always start off with a cartoon. This is a great cartoon. Snow falling on accountants. As you can see, the snowflakes are ordered both horizontally and vertically. And this really sums up the normal to a T because they're driven by the desire for order. In addition, of course, this is a characteristic or component that should be found in accountants. Financial people who work in finance should basically like N. And that's very, very important when you're talking about the normal. The next thing is, if you're talking about the normal, the way you should think of them is they're low on neuroticism. That's combined with the desire for order. They're sort of unpredictable. When their N is low, it's individualistic, high degree of emotion. They skirt the edge of the law. Whereas on the other hand, if their normal is high, you're conservative and flexible, ethical, logical and rational. You're a very, very mature person. And note that we're talking about as I said, when you're talking about low normal, you're talking about the bottom sort of 10%, and high normal, you're talking about top 10%. The normal started off with the Humm-Wadsworth model for 7 emotional intelligence components, and the normal is seen as a controlling factor over the other 6 factors. That's how Rosenoff and Humm both saw the normal. Then when the 5-factor theory came out, and with the 5 components, one of them was neuroticism. And when you look up neurotic people, what's the definition of them? Well, they lack emotional control. Their emotions are in charge of them. So the way I characterize normal now is the opposite of being neurotic. It's the antithesis or the reciprocal of being, as a neurotic person is a normal person. The normal subcomponents, there are 4 that the Humm-Wadsworth in terms of subcomponents use. There's normal A, which defines consistency of behavior. People with a lot of this component in them are very consistent. They behave the same way all the time. Normal B is effectively self-reliance and self-improvement and a desire to be the best they can. Normal C defines how adaptable you are to other people's wishes. These people are conformists. They want to be all things to all people. And then normal D is emotional control. There's no warmth of emotional response, and these people can appear cold and unfeeling. So these are the 4 subcomponents of normal. And that turns into the normal's characteristics. There's a desire for order, as I said, is the main thing. And it's so normal people, and this cartoon is beautifully descriptive of normal, cooperative and law-abiding, very mature, very self-controlled, consistent and predictable. In fact, some people think they're boring. They're very, very self-reliant and confident, and they come across as being unemotional. If you've got a very, very high end, almost you become a cold fish. So that's the normal. This is a great picture of a normal in action. You can see the landscape picture, very, very conservative dress, pinstripes, very neat, orderly desk. That's when you meet someone like that, you're and reasonably friendly, as you can see, but basically formal. Right? What I say is that the normal is comparable to Freud's superego. If you remember the system of Freud, it has conscience, rules and standards is how you define the superego. What Freud said is that there were three parts to your personality. There was the id, which is your emotional drives, then your ego, which is the thinking, logical part, and the superego, which was the conscience, rules, and standards. And the normal is comparable to that. The main thing about the normal, different from the other 6 components, that as your age increases, your normal increases. It's the one component that does vary as you mature. Your other 6 components stay the same. Now, what can happen, of course, is although these are fixed in your temperament, what you can do is, well, you can't change your temperament, you can change your behavior, and you can learn other habits or control them. The other thing about the normal, which is interesting, is that it's soluble. The Romans had this great saying, "In vino veritas," in wine there is truth. And what they meant by that is if you got someone drunk, you'd find about what their character was really like underneath. And we have a wonderful example. I just love this cartoon, also this one. Here we have a normal at a party, which is on the verge of turning into an orgy. And you have the sort of couple behind really getting stuck into it and enjoying themselves. Meanwhile, the normal's there, still on his first, several hours into the party. He's still on his first glass of wine, and he's only had a couple of sips. As we said, normals want to be the best they can be. They're full of initiative and independence. They also have this desire, along with order, for social approval. And this leads them to being very good team players. So yes, they're full of initiative and independence, but they do what the team says. They have very, very high emotional control. Now, this, of course, is, step 4 of emotional intelligence, being in control. No, sorry, it's not step 2 of emotional intelligence, in the sense of being in control of your emotions. Now, what can come across, of course, is that they can be very inflexible, and they lack empathy. And they see people who are very emotional, in fact, as being weak. Right? The other thing that normals do is they tend to bottle up their emotions, and sometimes this can lead to something, a sudden outburst when another factor comes into play, or under stress. So, but high emotional control is very much the characteristic of a normal. Top dog, the classic way we recognize people. Well, first of all, is their talk. It's very logical and rational. Normals like working in professional organizations like legal firms, accountants, and their ideal positions, for example, in organizations are as an accountant or a CFO or a company officer or the legal officer of a company. Their dress is very conservative. It's pinstripes. And as you can, this another lovely picture of a normal here. She's dressed in black and white, which is 2 of the black, white, and gray are the colors of the normal. Their office is always neat and tidy. Their desk is neat and tidy, and their office is neat and tidy. And then with regard to meetings, they're always on time. One of the worst things you can do is be late for a normal, and they're formal. They exchange business cards, for example. Do not readily start using your first name to well in the meeting. And I said, they start with agendas and finish with action plans. Cars, the ideal car for a normal is here, the Rolls Royce. And here is a black Rolls Royce, which is the perfect car for a normal. They like price performance. That's what they're looking for, or very, very high quality. You think of someone who's mature and has been successful, that's the sort of things that they buy and they like doing. So the Bentley, and again, the colors, as I said, I often think of them as penguins. It's, black and white and, shades of gray in between. The other thing about a normal then is their social skills. Well, how do you get a normal on the side? The first thing you got to remember with normals is the first question they ask is, when you're trying to present something new, a new idea or a new proposal, is who else is doing this? That's the first question they ask. So you need to have reference cells. And this is one of the problems that startups face, is that most decision makers, large organizations in particular, are basically, they're not young, they're old. Older people, they're more mature, the normal is high, and they want reference cells. All right. The way you get them on board is, well, first of all, in your language, use the word logical a lot. They're logical, rational people. This appeals to them. Use business cards and brochures. In fact, exchanging the business cards is very important. And you mustn't say something stupid like, oh, I don't use business cards, because they'll look at you and think, well, mature people do, why not you? Also, they expect to see brochures. So you need to, these are the people who want to see brochures. In fact, they feel uncomfortable if you don't have one. Again, as I said, observing the formalities is very, very important. So that's being on time, shaking hands, exchanging business cards, and then, sit down. First of all, discuss the agenda for the meeting, see if they wanted to add anything to it, and remember at the end of the meeting, come up with an action plan. Another thing is, we've mentioned reference cells. We'll get them to come up with their own reference cell, i.e. replay a similar decision or investment that they've made, which is similar to the one you're discussing, and or a similar act that you want done. And say something like, do you remember, we were talking about buying a new computer, the last time you bought yourself a computer, when was that? What processes you go through? What were you looking for? Has that changed now, etc.? Things like that. The other thing is contain the emotion. They don't like lots of emotion. They're really sort of highly controlled, and they're not comfortable when people start doing it. So contain the emotion, business cards and formalities, business cards, brochures, observe the formalities, logics, but most of all, reference cell. Remember, the question they're always asking is who else is using it. Objections, they typically come up with 3 objections. First, I'll go work from down going upwards. 1, your proposition is not good enough. When someone's buying or looking at a new proposition, they basically look at 3 things: the company, the salesperson, and then the product. And the first thing they do is they'll look at your product, and they'll generally hire in some form of consultant and over to look at the technical side of your product and make sure it's basically it's good enough. They don't like your company typically because they don't think your company is either ethically or financially sound. And it's very, very important. They like buying from ethical companies, which then leads us on to price. What normals have learned is that when they're making a buying decision, or etc., is that they've learned that what they should do is ask for a discount, because what they've discovered is if they ask for a discount, they'll often get it. Now, why is this? Well, a lot of salespeople have the hustler component in them, which we discussed in the previous webinar. And what happens is that hustlers buy on a discount, but they sell on a discount. So what that means is that if you ask for a hustler for a discount, he'll give it to you. Now, of course, normals don't really like that. What they think is, well, how much discount is the next person getting? Or how much discount did the last person get? They actually don't want you to offer them a discount. What they want you to say is something like, no, that's our standard pricing schedule. We don't do discounts, etc. And they'll feel, we treat everyone the same, fairly. So that shows that your company is an ethical company. So I'm just trying to it's hard for people to realize this, but they don't really want a discount internally. They want to be buying from an ethical supplier, one that treats every customer the same and fairly. So that's the sort of 3 major objections normals come up with. The commitment technique is to use what's known as the narrative close, where you summarize the benefits and then go through them. So, for example, this one here is, we've agreed you need to diversify your super fund and have some equity component, and that you need to have what we've agreed is that you need to have a medium growth, low risk fund. We have considered 3 managers, and the best long-term performer is X. So logically, we should invest so much with X. You summarize the benefits and then come up with a decision and then repeat the decision. And, logically, we should invest with X is a wonderful closing statement for as I said, a normal. Managerial styles, well, normals follow the rule book. They like actions and agenda plans. That's very, very important. And as we said before, they're logical, rational decision makers, and they tend to call in experts. Now, what can happen is they can be so wrapped up in the rule book that they become control freaks. You must do it this way. They're the ideal bureaucrats. Normals make incredibly good administrators. and then they like bureaucratic systems and they like the rule book. So they work very well in jobs that need to follow a lot of processes, high degree of corporate governance, etc. So that's where normals sort of fit in best. In fact, the whole corporate governance movement is almost driven by high normal. Personality distance. Normals rely too heavily on facts when they're trying to sell a case, and they give too little credit to the feelings of the people they're talking to, trying to discuss a proposition. Another mistake they make is they expect a decision once the facts are given. They spend too much time on the needs of a person, but not enough on the wants. So what you've got to do is, teach normals a system like what we're talking about, Humm-Wadsworth here, which gives people, teaches you about a person's temperament and their anxieties, and make sure that the attention is paid for these. Normals really come across as being very, very businesslike, and they almost convey an intimidating impression. So having that warmth and friendliness in you does make, if that's in the temperament along with the normal, was a very powerful combination, as we'll see in a few moments when we talk about combinations. But that's effectively how normals are. Too much on facts, not enough on feelings, expect a decision once the getting. The three components, in fact, that they have the most difficulty with are these three: hustlers, movers, and double checkers. Hustlers, well, normals don't like them because they think they're unethical, and hustlers don't like normals because they think, that they don't want to do a deal. They follow the rules too much. And, hustlers like negotiating and bending the rules slightly. Movers, having highly energetic, enthusiastic, multitasking people, very emotional, lots of energy, buzz around. Well, again, normals say, no, that's not how you succeed. Business, you've got to be logical and rational, calm and collected, which movers are. And then double checkers, well, double checkers like to feel that they're, sympathetic and nice to people, and they want to talk over people's problems. Misery does love company, and because this is not the way normals, they aren't miserable. Normals have their task, and they just basically go through it one after the other. So those are the three risk groups for normals: hustlers, movers, and double checkers. If we talk about the combinations, which is the next thing, well, the first thing is a normal hustler. These people are enthusiastic, confident communicators, and they're social climbers and networkers. Very good at negotiation. They tend to meetings to be the life of the party. They're flexible. Do find the shortcut very attractive, but are smart, and they can deal with people. I've got up here Australia Chief Executive Ahmed for her. There was a lovely article about him in the Sydney Morning Herald, and he is a classic normal hustler. I mean, he's working for Australia Post. His package has become known as he's paid $5 million a year. And by comparison, for example, the head of the United States Postal Service, which is 20 times bigger than Australia Post, is paid $500,000 a year. So you have this irony that the Australian Post CEO, who is managing a business that's 1/20th the size of the US, is being paid 10 times as much as the US CEO. And when this article that was in the Sydney Morning Herald made this big point about how he networked his way to being successful, and it's very interesting. He's got a sort of fairly, job hopping. He sort of, worked for Citicorp. Suddenly he was working down in Melbourne for National Australia Bank. When a new CEO was appointed, he was out the next day. It's very interesting sort of profile, but there's no doubt about it. He's a shrewd negotiator, but he's also an enthusiastic, and confident. All right. Normal movers, they're driven. This chap is Bob Joss. He was worked at Wells Fargo, was headhunted to come to Australia to become the CEO of Westpac, was brilliantly successful. It was touch and go whether Westpac was going to survive when he came on board, and he basically turned the bank around, basically moved it upwards, and the share price under Bob's management went from $2 to $12, so a 600% gain in 4 years. Now, what he did is he put together an option package. There's a little bit of hustler involved as well. Put together an options package. It was the first real CEO's option package. And at the end of his term, which was about 4 to 5 years, he walked out having made $35 million in options. Now, don't worry. When he announced he was going, every Westpac shareholder, and I remember myself as one of those, was saying, Bob, don't go, because he'd done such a brilliant job, lifting the share price. I heard him speak. He has an incredibly energetic, enthusiastic manner of public speaking. He thrives on a constant stream of new activities. Sometimes, as they say, I mean, being normal, there's a lack of thought in their people skills, but because of their sociability and good intentions, most people basically soon forgive them. And they always think they're doing a good job, so criticism can be bruising to the ego. But I don't know how that affected Bob Johnson, but that's what you can imagine that happening. Normal double checkers, the best one is Kim Beazley. With him, he was the leader of the opposition when he was in Labour. He comes from a political family. His father was a very successful politician as well. Kim Beazley then became ambassador to America, very successful there. These people tend to be ultra cautious, look for faults and dangers, have a very high sense of duty, and are very good constructive critics. And in fact, they're great administrators, as I say at the bottom there. I mean, it's the perfect combination for a CFO, because they're good at solving problems as they arise. They do suffer a bit from hypochondria. Even Kim Beazley is a bit notorious for that. But on the other hand, as I said, a very good individual, very sympathetic. And they're sympathetic is merely words. They often try and do something about it practically. So good combination for someone who's in finance, CFO, as a CFO, not very good for a politician. But on the other hand, Kim Beazley was extremely good, as I said, as a ambassador in the U.S. Did a very, very good job. For the artist, normal artist, I've chosen Steve Wozniak. He's talked about, with all the sort of films and books on Steve Jobs that have come out, Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple, always gets some pieces. And of course, what comes across about Wozniak is he's a very considerate, tactful, and polite person. Phenomenal computer engineer, great problem solver, creative, tends to be a little bit perfectionist and idealistic. This came across some of the films and almost becomes stubbornly dedicated, which A's can, of course, can be. And I can't remember which film, but it was a film where they had Jobs giving sort of 3 or 4 presentations of the growth of the company. And in it, he was talking to people before each of the presentations. And every time Wozniak would appear and say, well, give a mention to the people team at Apple II. And there's Jobs trying to market the Mac, get the Macintosh going and market the Macintosh. And he's saying, no, I don't want to deflect people from it. And Wozniak was saying, no, you must mention the people who've worked hard on Apple II. They're providing you the money. Now, that's a classic example of how they can be sort of stubbornly, A's can be very, very stubborn. Normal politicians, well, they, again, can be quite successful. And Julia Gillard, Australia's first female prime minister, was a beautiful example of a normal politician in action. She was very, very good, smart, good with words, and she could defend her ideas and opinions vigorously, but make it appear rational. The weakness that they tend to have is they tend to have very firm ideas based on entrenched beliefs. And of course, Gillard's were based on her history of working in the unions, and she was, left-wing socialist. They like work that is important in the public eye and visibly successful. And of course, becoming prime minister was part of that. Like to be well-dressed and well-presented. And as, for example, when she was prime minister, the person, her, in quotes, wife, so to speak, was her hairdresser. And you don't see much of him now. You don't see much of it, etc. But she, of course, was very well groomed, very well turned out. problems they have occur when their capabilities, training, or experience or qualifications don't match their achievement drive. And one can see that as a fault with Julia, in the sense that the issues that came up, which were outside her range, that she'd make, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. She'd make decisions where a bit of waiting would have been excellent. For example, one of them was when they put the live cattle ban on cattle going to Indonesia because there was a TV program saying that they weren't being treated well. Well, instead of sending, say, $20 million worth of stun rods, she suddenly, out of the blue, banned live cattle exports to Indonesia. Bad for Indonesia because it was a major source of beef. A complete shock, I'm sure. Secondly, the poor animals, okay, yes, they weren't being badly treated in Indonesia, but they were being stuck in lots, etc., and they were dying of thirst. I mean, so it was a terrible thing to happen. And that's a classic example of a decision being made outside her range. She didn't know. She made it quickly on the basis of a TV program, where what she should have done is basically said, "Look, let me look at it, get the bureaucrats, come back with recommendations, etc." Finally, we have the normal engineer. They tend to be, as they're smart, obsessive geniuses. The one I've chosen here is Madame Curie. Very interesting. She won the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1905 and the Nobel Chemistry Prize in 1911. Something very few people have done, won a double like that in different fields. Very successful research scientist. She was very much the loner, of course, and fortunately died discovering radium polonium, not realizing how radioactive they were. Her sort of work was classically being an unambiguous project where they could work alone, and she actually disliked historically being a public presenter about her work. She actually would get her husband to do it. So classic Madame Curie is a wonderful example of a normal engineer in action. So finally, how do we summarize this up? Normals are driven by the desire for order. They're non-neurotic, i.e. they're in complete emotional control. As mentioned previously, they're governed by precedent. Their first question is, who else is doing it? As we get older, the end grows. That's very important. And the other thing about the normal is that it's soluble. It's in vino veritas, as the Romans say. In wine, there is truth. With normals, two things to remember is always argue that this is the logical, rational thing to do, and always remember and refer to the procedures manual. They are the classic bureaucrats. They like to have a procedures manual. In fact, the first task that they will often do when they go to a new company or new organization is say, where is the procedures manual, and sit down. Well, that summarizes the normal. As I said, that finishes now the 7 components. There's going to be a break for a couple of months, and then I'll effectively talk about how you can use the Humm, going through the 4 stages of emotional intelligence using Goldman's model. So I'll sign off now and hope you've enjoyed this video. Right. Okay, screen share off. Right, I'm back. Okay, please notice I've got a gray top on, which is classic there. So that's, as I said, gray, black, and white are the normal colors. So I'll wave you goodbye and stop the broadcast.